Welcome back to our podcast, Inclusive Leadership. It's not black or white. I'm Anna Poole, executive coach, here with my colleague, psychotherapist, and teacher, Bede Draper. Hey, I don't know about you guys, but I really loved the dialogue in our last podcast. Talk about getting real. Bede surface nuances of how we leaders think and behave that almost no one ever talks about. I think a lot of us were squirming just a bit. Here's some sound bites. It's easy to say, oh, sure, I believe in inclusive leadership 100%. And a lot of leaders are saying that right now. But if you look at the evidence, you have to wonder. So Bede explained that while a leader can say they believe inclusivity is important, in most cases, it's just not quite as important as the leader's primary agenda, which is to use their leadership role to maintain and build their status and power and to reinforce their success. This sheds light on the fact that as humans, we have to make a fundamental choice to be moved by inclusivity and not by our need for power, status, or other forms of ego gratification. He went on to say that until we see the value of an inclusive style of relating, we won't make a deep commitment to learn to be an inclusive leader. This is because we'll be full of blind spots and we won't see the many ways in which we are moved by the desire for status, power, and, well, human vanity. Let's just stop here and think about it. I know you can think of a number of leaders you work with who have chosen to use their role to reinforce their power. That's easy to see, but it might be harder to examine your own conduct and see where you might be using your role to reinforce your power sources as well. I know I can see it in myself, and yeah, that feels bad. But I think if I just allow this insight to show me where I'm not lining up my conduct with my values, I'll learn a lot about how to be more inclusive. As Socrates once said, an unexamined life is not worth living. So Bede, let's focus the dialogue today on better understanding the forces that drive us humans toward the dark side. Like, what's moving us to crave power and to love money and status more than being genuinely connected to ourselves and other people?
Well, I think what we'll start with is a very important principle that it's in juxtaposition. When we juxtapose, that means when we place one thing alongside another. When we juxtapose two things, we can clearly see what we mean by the dark side. And so we have to sort of, in one sense, it's only in the context of the light can we see the darkness. So we have to be very clear on what is truly good. Now, what we've discussed so far is that when I have goodwill active in me, in other words, I will the good of others, but I'm actually moved to will the good of others. This goodwill embraces or includes everybody. And when I'm caring, in other words, I'm moved to take care, I'm actually including people by virtue of the fact that I am moved by the desire to take care of not only myself, but the other people around me. Now, in juxtaposition to that, it's so easy to fall away from goodwill. So you're no longer moved by, wishing well or the good of others. And you're no longer moved to take care. We see this. So that what happens is, to the degree that we fall away from goodwill, we become full of ill will or hostility of various kinds. And when we fall away from taking care, we become, first of all, indifferent and then ruthless. And so when we actually have a group or a group of people working together cooperatively, who, and it's never perfect, but generally speaking, are moved by goodwill and concern, that's the basis. You have a happy human environment. Problem is, so we're talking about the fact that when a group or a culture is not based on goodwill and concern, to that degree, it falls into the abyss of darkness. And when we have leaders, he or she who is in a position of power, they literally are going to determine the context, because they are saying, this is how I want you to live, by their very actions. And you see, the thing is that when you look at our culture, and not every aspect of our culture, but in a highly acquisitive culture, what happens is you get three values that tend to determine us. And that is the value of ruthless acquisitiveness or greed. Now, I don't mean owning possessions. I mean the ruthless intent to take for myself, even if I take from others, to get what I want. So that's what we mean by greed. Then the desire for outstandingness and fame. This desire to be bigger and better than other people. And lastly, the desire for power, the status, the control and dominance over other people. It's like the pecking order in the chicken farm. Do you see what I mean? So what happens is when we're under the sway of what we call dark values, greed, fame, and power, and we are satisfying those desires in our leadership role, we're in trouble. Because what happens is we then get a very competitive environment. Now, I'm not talking about competition, which can be very creative, because in the context of goodwill and concern, like when you're learning to play a game of tennis, you gain skills through competition, don't you? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about falling into the abyss of a toxic culture that's competitive. And what we find is when this happens, I as leader, if I need to assume, we talked about last time, we need to assume a role, don't we? A role of a supervisor, but at the same time relate person to person. But when I become the role, when the role becomes a function of my psychology, particularly my appetite for status and power and acquisition, even though I present an innocent face to the world, my real agenda is not friendly. My real agenda is using people to maintain myself. And when I, as a leader, mirror this to others, what happens is they take on the same thing. So you get this desperate fight to get to the top. Now, when this psychological desire to get to the top at all costs is operative in my life, four emotions become very, very predominant. The first is jealousy. You know, for example, have you seen people in a board meeting, someone gets a good attention from the boss and you desperately would love to be in the same position as they are? That's jealousy. But that jealousy can intensify to what we call envy. And envy is the thing of, I want to have what you've got. Do you see what I mean? So when I'm full of envy, how can I possibly, the goodwill is gone. I want to take from you. I want to have what you've got. And then it ramps up even more. Rivalry. I want to beat you. And then, but this isn't the end of the story. It culminates in this beautiful emotion called malice. I want to destroy you. Now, this is all done in the context of nice, polite interaction. But have you seen character assassination, where there was a medieval monk by the name of St. Thomas Aquinas? He talked about a thing called whispering, which is where you seek to deprive people of the friendship of others through working in the background and whispering. Now, within a competitive environment, whispering, this being moved by envy, rivalry, jealousy, and malice, it destroys the cooperative bonds. It creates a terribly toxic culture. Even though the culture might be making money, you know what I mean, like in terms of function, it creates a tremendously unhappy environment. It is not inclusive, because when I'm being ruled by jealousy, rivalry, envy, and malice, I'm excluding people. It's me. It's me first, and I will sacrifice others because that's how the game works. So this type of thing. So fundamentally, we need to see the value of a cooperative culture based on goodwill and concern. Because to the degree we depart from that, we have a tremendous problem.
This is remarkable what you're saying, because I certainly see, these kinds of envy, jealousy, rivalry, malice. I see these emotions And they are very, very toxic in the culture, and they prevent people from really bringing their best points of view, their creativity, their innovation, their trust to work, to the point where people, say to me, my job is just someplace I go between 9 and 5, and I don't invest any energy. I don't have relationships there. I just get in and get out. And I think that's a lot because of what you're talking about, these qualities of super competitiveness and lack of inclusion, lack of caring, lack of support. So yeah, I definitely see this.
Because you see, the whole problem is, if I'm in a war zone, I'm defensive.
That's right. You're
and
just trying to survive, right?
yeah, and the thing is that corporate culture often is a Darwinistic enterprise of sharpening our Darwinistic teeth so we can take out the enemy. And that type of life. Where does creativity come? Where does a free flow of communication come? Because it's not a safe environment. This is truly an unsafe environment. And it doesn't matter what we say, and sociopaths, for example, politicians and sociopaths are extremely good at human relations. But no one would ever necessarily say that what they're expressing is goodwill and concern. They are just presenting a face, like what the T.S. Eliot said, to put on the face to meet the faces of the faces you shall meet. There's no meeting of persons. There's just simply presentation, and where you have to pretend friendliness, but at the same time work out how you can take the other person out before they take you out. Not a good look.
No, it's really not. And it kind of loops us back to some earlier discussions we had about objectification of people.
Absolutely.
And thingification of people, so that we're no longer relating as human being to human being.
Yes.
And let's remember that when we objectify others, we automatically objectify ourselves into an object as well. So we lose our own qualities of humanity. So this is a really good discussion, because it's really a zero-sum game. There are no winners in this. And you can say, well, someone can become a multimillionaire, billionaire. Okay, great. But if you really inquire into the quality of their life, it's probably not going to be very great.
They've destroyed their heart. They've destroyed their heart, because the heart of a human being actually is goodwill and concern. And if our lives don't conform to it, there's no possibility of living a worthwhile, constructive, and happy life.
Well, that's pretty sobering, but at the same time, I think it's refreshing, because we all sense this. Those of us who work in corporate America, or just in any organization where we can feel sometimes the toxicity of leadership, we know this is true just from our own experiences. So it's refreshing to have it described so clearly, Bede.
Well, you know how our process of taking people out of the abyss, if you like, unless we actually can see the darkness, we can't correct it. And we won't have the willingness to correct it. So it's actually very important. But as we said before, we're not objectifying the darkness of other people. The corporate world is toxic. We want to see that darkness and how we express it in our life, because that's our responsibility. And then we can conform our acts to goodwill and concern.
Yeah, that's such a good reminder, because I know instantly I start thinking about people I've met who I think are toxic leaders. And instead, I need to keep coming back to myself and go, when and where do I show up in a toxic way as a leader, or even just as a person?
That's a wonderful point, Anna, because we're all involved in this. We're all brothers and sisters with the same problem. We're all brothers and sisters actually with the same solution.
So, Bede, we need to end soon, but do you want to just leave us, with a reminder on what do we need to do to kind of get out of this dark abyss?
Well, first of all, there's a in the juxtaposition, we have this thing. First of all, a recognition can occur right here, right now. I can recognize that I've fallen away from goodwill and concern. I can then reorientate myself to being on point. And then through living that understanding, by responding in that light, I establish myself more and more in a management style that is reflective of goodwill and concern.
Okay, Bede, this is really great. Thank you so much. And we have a little bit more for you guys, so Keep checking this channel. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye, Anna.
Bye, Bede.